global market insights, local market intel, expert opinion. The hat trick of factors that will lead to a success in your business decision making. And here in Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes, that's exactly what we aim to deliver to you. I'm Fernando. Our focus today is on the transport sector, or in other words, the mobility sector. This globally is an industry worth more than $6 trillion. But where is the Sri Lankan transport and mobility sector? There is never a doubt about the vital role that this sector will play in the development growth of an economy. No tourist likes to spend hours trying to get into the city after having landed at the airport, and no investor would like to be caught in a 3-hour traffic jam on the other side of the road when they just want to get to a building and have a meeting. These are some of the very common transport and mobility related dilemmas that are ever present in so many countries worldwide. Even in Sri Lanka, we complain about how our transport systems need to grow, to develop, and this has been hotly debated in many business and political circles over the last few weeks. But let's find out about the real situation of this sector, and most importantly, what is the future of this sector looking like in today's episode of Bisnomics. And joining me for this discussion is an expert in mobility solutions who is none other than Mr. Sheran Fernando. Sheran, welcome to Bisnomics. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Tarindu, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sheran, let's talk about how vital transport is to our economy. And when you say transport and mobility, I like your term, mobility. What is exactly entailed in this? And like I said, how is this mobility sector doing globally and locally? Share with us your perspective.
Okay, that's a lot of questions. So let me start. Globally, the mobility stroke transport industry is about 5% of GDP. It employs about 10 million people all over the world. It includes shipping, it includes air, it includes transport within a country.
It includes getting there somehow.
It is everything to do with a good leaving its place of manufacture to getting to its place of consumption.
Whatever it takes to get there.
Exactly. So now when the global economy is 5% made up of transport, in Sri Lanka, transport accounts for about $1 billion annually, and it's 11% of our GDP. Therein lies a problem, Tarindu, because why are we spending more on transport than the world? So it shows that there is a lot of room for increased efficiency in the local context, and we need to find these efficiencies in order for our goods, services, you mentioned tourism, to be globally marketable and globally cost effective.
It's a very interesting comparison. So as you said, on average, the world spends 7% of the GDP,
5% global,
of GDP,
and
we are spending 11%. That's more than twice.
Yes.
So what you're saying is, when an economy grows, when an economy becomes better and developed, they will ideally be finding smarter mobility solutions, and in turn, their cost of transport and the cost of mobility will actually be coming down.
It should come down, and I think from the guidelines of the questions that you shared with me, I think we'll be getting into those areas.
For sure. Let's talk about our local transport solutions industry, Sheran. Now, we are closing upon 50 years since joining the free market economy and the globalization forces of economics, but we are still not even making our own car. Is it a matter of concern, or is it just how globalization works? I'd like you to really go into the details here, because this is something which is hotly debated upon from the very serious economic circles right down to the Facebook and social media posts, where they are saying, okay, this country has their own car, this country has their own car, why not us? And especially they draw comparisons with efforts in the 1970s and 80s to have our own car. And I mean, there are so many countries that doesn't have they really don't make their own vehicle brand. But a country with 21 million population, one might say, no, there is enough potential to really do that. But is it only about having your own locally made car brand, or when you say becoming better at mobility, should we take a more wider and a more pragmatic approach? What is your thought on this as an insider in the mobility sector?
There's a lot of passion involved with a local car, and we go back in history when there was cars assembled in Sri Lanka. This is again a complicated question, Fernando, and I'll try to answer it broadly, and if you want to go into more detail, we can.
Sure.
So let's take Malaysia. The Proton is the Malaysian national car. Malaysia has 29 million, a population of 29 million versus Sri Lanka's 22 million. Malaysia has a per capita income of $28,000. We have just under 4,000. It is only in December 2019, after Geely, the Chinese manufacturer, bought over a significant shareholding in Proton, that they broke even.
Understood.
Right. And so I think in terms of economies of scale, now Proton made 93, they made 93,000 units in 2019. The sweet spot for profitability is about 100,000 units. I don't think Sri Lanka has the domestic market to manufacture 100,000 units of a single model. However, all those figures are in the context of internal combustion engine cars. When you go into modern electric vehicles, the situation changes, because you're drawing major components like batteries, motors, controllers from manufacturers of those components. Also, you have a scenario where you have 3D printing, you have composites like carbon fiber. So, I think it's a good thing we don't have a local car at this point in time, because we would have lost money, significant amounts of money. That does not mean to say that there isn't potential for it in the future. However, we should look at the right technology and not the old technology.
Since we are mentioning about this, Sheran, now if you take about Sri Lanka and a Sri Lankan homegrown automobile brand, before we come to a Sri Lanka homegrown automobile brand, can't we look at being a part of the automobile sector in a different way? Maybe we start having better battery manufacturers, maybe we start having manufacturers that can make components. Would that not be a starting point to enter this automobile value chain in a bigger way?
Tarind, broadly, I think Sri Lanka needs to concentrate on the manufacturing sector. You know, sadly, one of the reason why we are very susceptible to external economic trauma, or trauma caused by externalities, the pandemic, the bombing, you know, things like that, is because our manufacturing sector over the last 20 years has been declining as a percentage of GDP. So, yes, we need to diversify manufacturing, and we should be looking at areas of manufacturing with high value addition. Now, there are some very profitable and very successful component manufacturers in Sri Lanka. The average internal combustion motor vehicle takes 40,000 moving parts compared to 17 in
40,000 parts.
40,000 moving parts only, okay. Probably 100,000 parts, right? So, manufacturing a few components successfully and being able to make a car locally are two different things.
Are you saying we can actually maybe look at earning more dollars for the country if we can manufacture some of those parts and be a part of the supply chain of some of the global automobile brands?
Yes, I think so. But again, we should understand where the industry is heading. The industry is heading into a world of electric technology, autonomous technology. So, 70% of the value, 60 to 70% of the value of the car will be the battery. It's a lithium-ion battery. It takes graphite, graphene. Sri Lanka does have graphene resources.
Understood.
So, we should look at areas where we can have good local value addition. And in the electric car and the battery energy systems manufacture, I think it is an area we should be exploring.
Sheran, let's talk about the current road capacities and our economic growth, because let's admit the queues are actually growing longer every day.
Yeah.
In your view, are we falling short in terms of where we should be with regard to road capacity? Because we see, if you ask myself, you know, from the time I was a child and to now, the morning traffic is an absolute nightmare. And in your view, the road capacities, yes, we see a few highways coming up, but in terms of our main road infrastructure, apart from a little bit of repairs and maintenance here and there, we hardly see any capacity growth. Maybe we need smarter ways of handling the current capacities we have. What is your take on this?
Okay, so I'll give you some statistics and I'll give you my take on it. We spend on average about 150 minutes a day in transport.
150 minutes a day.
150 minutes a day.
About 2.5 hours.
Yes, right. It costs us 46 rupees per kilometer to travel. Right, these are university statistics. I mean, let's take them as broadly accurate.
Yes.
The travel speed in the city of Colombo was measured at 8 kilometers an hour in 2020, an estimate. The extrapolation based on that is by 2035, it will be 4 kilometers an hour. Now, at 4 kilometers an hour, Tarindu, even two people of our size could walk faster. Okay, so
I like how you draw the comparison there.
All right, so we have a challenge.
Yes.
But I think it is a good challenge. Now, let me quote you another statistic. The Harvard Business School published a report, a case study on mobility and future mobility, and it found that on American estimates, shared mobility vehicles, one shared mobility vehicle did the job of 9 to 32 privately owned vehicles, right? So, if you take it at the lower estimate of 9,
Yes.
that means for every shared mobility vehicle,
8 less vehicles.
8 less vehicles on the road. So, I think the solution to this problem is by using shared mobility, and to support that we need a policy structure and a technology platform.
Sheran, are we using the wrong benchmarks here? Because in terms of from a personal perspective, we see a lot of Sri Lankans, they take a lot of pride in the fact that they are able to afford their own vehicle. Yes. They are able to travel with their own vehicle. And in Sri Lanka, that jump from, public sector transport or jump from traveling in buses to being able to travel in a car, it's always seen as a sign of economic growth.
Status.
As long as this perception is there, do you actually think people will be ready to adopt practices like carpooling or traveling in shared vehicles? Today we all go in my vehicle, tomorrow we go in your vehicle. Or do they continue to take pride in, no, I'm able to park my car along with the cars of so many others? Is this more than a, I would say, economic issue? Is this more of a perception and a attitude issue?
I think you're right, Tarindu. I mean, interestingly, just before the start of the interview, my daughter texted and said, Dad, I need a little bit of money in my card. Now, she comes from a petrol head family with multiple cars at home. And we keep saying, do you want to learn to drive? Yeah, Dad, maybe next weekend. It's not happened. So I think it is changing. That attitude is changing. And globally, all the statistics are that transport will be B2B, not B2C. It's not the customer that will be buying the car. What the customer wants is a mobility solution.
Correct.
And what the customer wants is experience. He doesn't want to spend his money on buying a car. He wants to go to the beach and have fun. But he wants his mobility experience to be efficient.
Correct.
So I think it is changing. And I think in terms of policy, we should make this change easy. We should support this change.
Sheran, I read a very interesting article on one of the leading business research channels about that as more and more what we call self-driving vehicles or self-driven vehicles, this technology comes into play, because this is a very serious technology that everyone is really looking at. As more and more such vehicles come into play and the driving factor is being taken out, it will be all about sitting in the vehicle and enjoying the drive. And that in the future, correct me if I am wrong, but they said in the future, vehicles will be sold not based on how good the driving experience is, but maybe how good your entertainment facilities in the car actually is, or maybe how much of a driving experience, the traveling experience you are actually getting, because you are almost taking the driving factor out of driving.
I think you are. I think the technology is there. I mean, driverless technology level 5 is in the market today. Most manufacturers have them, have this technology. It's only what hasn't caught up is the legal framework on how you deal with this technology.
Understood.
And that is catching up very quickly. let me just explain the acronym ACES, Autonomous, Connected, Electric and Shared.
ACES.
ACES. That's what transport is going to be. And the technology is all here. What autonomous does is takes away the cost of the driver from the transport element.
Understood.
That's a significant cost. What connected does and what shared does is it improves the productivity of use of your hardware. That also drops the price a lot. So that's the technology drop in the technology created efficiency through ACES. Electric is the third element that brings in significant efficiency. The sun produces the world's energy for 1 year within 2 hours.
Oh wow!
Right.
That's an interesting fact.
And the only problem is we couldn't store that energy. Now with the present level of battery technology, we can store that energy. So with an Acer's technology mobility solution, your costs, your energy cost is also now out of the equation.
Correct.
So you've probably driven 90% of your cost structure out of your mobility.
Noted.
Right. So 5% of world GDP, you could probably bring that to maybe 1%. So you're dealing with a much more efficient model.
An excellent setting for the rest of the discussion, Sheran. There some very good points. What is going to be the future of the electronic vehicles industry within the framework of a global mobility sector? Let's find out about that and more after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Our focus today is on the global mobility sector, and most importantly, what steps can we take to improve the Sri Lankan mobility and transport sector services and solutions. Joining me for this discussion is a specialist in the field of mobility and transport, Mr. Sheran Fernando. Sheran, let's talk about EVs, electronic vehicles. Now, this is going into being a $1 trillion industry, and we see so many big brands investing a lot of money, starting very large scale battery factories and facilities in China. This is serious stuff. This is no longer a fancy thing that people are trying out. In fact, the most valuable automobile brand in the world today is actually an EV. It's an electronic vehicle. My question to you, do you see these large fuel guzzling vehicles that we have today going away anytime soon, and is in fact EV going to be truly our future? And if that is to happen, what are the infrastructure that we need?
Okay. Yes, I think EV is not just the future, I think it is the present. Most developing countries have made legislation, they've announced legislation of banning internal combustion engines around 2025.
Correct.
So us petrol heads, like in the times of prohibition, will be hiding some petrol, in our backyard to power, to go for a drive in our old V8s. Yeah. But yes, I think it's very much a part of the present and the very near future. We talked about how efficient electric vehicles were, cost efficient, but also their efficiency in terms of energy usage, because of the 17 moving parts, is significant. Internal combustion engine vehicle brings 40% efficiency, and the electric vehicle claims more than 90% because
Wow.
of so much less moving parts. There was a really interesting picture of Fifth Avenue, New York City in the year 1900. They were all horses.
Horses.
Right, all horses. In the corner of the picture was one car. The same picture from the same place, the year 1913. No horses, all cars. Right, so the disruption will be quick. The world is talking about 2025, but I think it might even be sooner. And so we are seeing this disruption. Now, in a Sri Lankan context, we have abundant sun. The cost of fuel for transport purpose is $2.9 billion a year.
Sorry, say that again.
The cost of fuel
Yes.
for transport
Okay.
is $2.9 billion a year.
Wow.
Our total fuel import bill in 2018 was about $7 billion. So this is our largest import. and we are a country plagued by current account deficits. So the most obvious,
and blessed with so much of abundant sun
so
throughout the whole year.
So I think the solution to the problem of the current account deficit is sort of staring us in the face. It's rapid progression into electric vehicles and to follow the world. Now, we spoke about the efficiencies of electric vehicles, and the rest of the world are going down that road, and those efficiencies will be captured in their products. So, if we don't go down that road, and transport is costing us, transport is a factor of 11% of GDP and the rest of the world is at 1%, 2%, we'll find it, we will struggle to be competitive. So we have an opportunity to nail this, and our geographic location, because of the sun, because the country is small, and so our total distance we need to commute is low. We are blessed with all the right elements to be a country that goes into this today.
Understood. And also I read in multiple research articles that all what you need to cover a country like Sri Lanka, because even the electric vehicles, the amount of distance they can travel keeps on expanding.
Yes.
What an electric car could travel, let's say about 10-20 years ago, is not what they can travel today. They can go a lot more of a distance, and that all you need to cover an entire country like Sri Lanka is somewhere around 40 stations around the whole country.
Sure. That will more than cover it. When the electric vehicle duty went down significantly in 2015, over 200 charging stations came up. So, supply or demand for demand drove supply.
Understood.
Right? And I think again, at some point the import ban will be lifted, and my plea to the government is, when they are lifting it, to lift it, to give these signals of shared mobility, of EVs, given the right signals, I think we could be in a really good place.
Understood. Sheran, let's talk about one of the issues which we addressed slightly earlier as well, but I want you to go into more detail on it now. People are still waiting to buy their own car, and you see the rate at which prices of used cars has just skyrocketed. I mean, you are having some of the I would say some of the Japanese used cars are having a price point which is a little bit closer to what some of the premium European automobile brands used to command before the pandemic. That means people still want to buy vehicles, and that is not something that is really going to go away. But our road capacities, if you take for example Galle Road, there is no way that we can really expand Galle Road even more further. Same roads, increasing amount of vehicles into the future. Is there a way that we can make transport or mobility, as you said, mobility in Sri Lanka smarter and sustainable?
Yes, and I'm sorry I'm going over the same thing over and over again. It's one reason is I'm very passionate about it. But the other reason is I genuinely do feel that the solution to the problem lies in using technology, shared mobility platforms, as one part of the solution, because that makes the number of vehicles on the road significantly less. The second part of the solution was taught to us by COVID, and that is why travel in the first place.
Don't travel at all.
We've been living our lives, we've been shut down, work has been happening, economies have run, governments have functioned, so that element also brought in a solution to the problem.
Don't travel at all.
Yes, I mean, there is a public transport element of the solution, and I think you are very right where buying a car in Sri Lanka is aspirational, and we need to, I think there needs to be a process of education, and your aspiration maybe can be moved from not the car you own but the carbon you save.
Correct.
Right, the road space you save.
We need a shift of mindset. For example, the kid who grew up in the village who goes to Colombo for the job, he is expected to come back to the village in his own car.
Yes.
If not, it seems like he is not progressing. And until we have these very traditional and I would say environmentally insensitive aspirations, I really don't see things changing. And correct me if I am wrong, Sheran, but already there are so many governments that have figured out that improving the transport situation in the country is a lot to do with investing more in public transport. For example, look at Luxembourg. They have made public transport, the public tram, free of charge for even visitors to travel. And I experienced that when I went to Luxembourg in 2020, just before the lockdowns came in, and it was a fantastic service. Look at Singapore, they have an excellent public transport system with the underground, and people don't need to always get their own car. So, as you very correctly said, the government also must look at improving public sector transport, but I guess we will come that to a little later. Let me ask you about these brand new versus used. I know you have a plethora of experience in having fought some of these issues. Now, used cars, or what they call as reconditioned sometimes, is projected as cheaper vehicles, or that the cost is less, and that it's a much more affordable way of purchasing a car for citizens. But from a very neutral viewpoint, I would like to ask you, when you compare brand new versus used cars, what is the true cost to the customer and our economy from these two elements? And let's start with maybe the price point itself and also the total cost of ownership.
In terms of the total cost of ownership, firstly, what is brand new and what is not brand new? Let's define that, yes. Right. So, brand new is a car sent by the manufacturer through their local representative in a country to the consumer. Anything that is not coming in that route is not brand new. Call it reconditioned, call it used, call it whatever. If you look at the cost of usage, and if you look at it over a period of say 5 years, definitely a brand new car is more cost efficient than a used car. But again, this is in the conventional world of internal combustion engine cars, with this huge number of components, of huge number of wear and tear through moving components, things like that. If you have,
let's say, 100,000 parts,
yes,
you have a 100,000 probability of things going wrong.
Yes. Now, when you change that into a electric car, into this Acer sort of genre of cars, the main three components are a motor, a battery, and a controller. A controller is the element of communication between the motor and the battery. It interprets signals and it tells one thing what the other thing should do, you know, it communicates. So, it's got these three components and it's got a whole lot of software. So, in that element, all of these old ideologies of used versus brand new versus used kind of break down. It becomes less relevant. It's about the motor. It's how many kilometers has your motor run. It's a little bit like buying an airplane. How many hours has this airplane run? You know, so I think the decision paradigms will also change with the disruption within the industry.
And when you are actually looking at these imported vehicles, which are what they call used cars, people have this perception that it's actually cheaper than buying brand new. What do you say to that?
I think the consumer must not look at price of purchase, but you use the technical term cost of ownership,
which a lot of people are not fully aware of.
Yes. So, it's about cost of ownership, how much, and you know, maybe look at the cost of ownership per kilometer, because the cost of ownership for someone doing 2,000 kilometers a month will be very different to someone doing 300 kilometers a month, right? The more kilometers you do, the more a newer car will cost you less to own.
Understood.
Right? The less kilometers you do is when you may want to compromise on the newness of the car, because you're running it less. So, I think the answer to your question, I'm not going to answer this. I spent my life, the better part of my life, working for manufacturers, and so in wearing the manufacturer hat, you know, if I were to answer that question, Understood. It's of course new. But what I would say is study what works for you in terms of cost of ownership.
Sheran, let's talk about these newer concepts we see. For example, there is a lot of talk about having a separate lane for cyclists. How come we are not encouraging cycling within Colombo? We don't even sometimes have a proper cyclist lane. Now we see some efforts, yes, on certain days to have a separate lane for cyclists. But what about integrating some of those? Because, for example, if you go to Europe, we see cycling is actually a way of life there. They are not, they are very proud of it. Sometimes some of the European prime ministers actually come to work in their cycles. What is your thought on this?
I mean, cycling is great. I'm an avid cyclist myself. In my previous office, what drove a lot of our team to use cycles to come to work is it took them less time coming, because they didn't get caught in so much traffic. But we gave them showers and lockers. In Sri Lanka, in terms of our weather and our humidity,
correct,
unless you have showers and lockers, cycling isn't a feasible option.
Understood.
I mean, your level of hygiene when you go for that meeting,
you can't go all sweaty for a meeting.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. So I think we have to cycle. The Sunday cycle lanes are great. It looks really, families are teaching their kids to cycle and things like that. I think it can work. I think the final solution is a mixture of all of these things, and it's a good thing that the government is also trying these things.
Understood.
So cycles are a part of a solution. Staggered work times is a part of a solution.
Staggered work times, that is having different times for different groups.
Yes. So you don't have one peak hour.
Correct. When you have schools and offices starting at 8 o'clock,
yes,
it rushes things.
And if you have a 20-minute commute from home to work, we all know that during school holidays that is halved.
Absolutely.
Right. So again, we know one of the problems.
What is needed in order to improve the Sri Lankan mobility sector and the transport solutions which are available in this country, and how should the government policy change with this regard? Let's find out about that after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. The focus of our discussion today is about the global and local mobility sector. In other words, getting from here to there. How can we do it in a smarter way, a cheaper way, in a way that is sustainable to the environment, less impact on the economy, and convenient for you, the rider or the consumer. Joining me for this very insightful discussion today is an expert on mobility solutions and services, Mr. Sheran Fernando. Sheran, let's talk about government policy. Now, this is a bit of a dicey topic, and I believe government policy on transport and mobility is something which is quite sensitive as well. We see a lot of different stakeholders talking about it. But if you look at the government policy that has been there towards mobility in Sri Lanka, not only this government, throughout some of the previous successive governments, can we be considering that to be satisfactory, or has it simply been neglected? What are your thoughts?
Okay, let me skirt around that question, because I think the answer to your question, I am quite happy to be candid, but let me skirt around it first,
for sure.
You can bring me back if you want to. The Ceylon Chamber of Commerce created an initiative called the National Agenda Committee on Transport and Logistics, and they have given a report to the government with a series of proposals. This committee was very multidisciplinary, coming from academics, transport specialists, a bunch of people in the sector, and a lot of thought went into this report. The report has just been handed over to the government, and what we would really like to see and what we would invite the government to do was to engage with the stakeholders in building long-term policy. You've given me a whole lot of opportunity through your questions to caricature what the policy should be. I mean, broadly, I think the policy should be the government sort of focusing people away from private ownership and towards platform-driven shared mobility. It should be away from internal combustion engines and into electric vehicles. I think we should also segment intercity from intracity, and the solutions are different. Intercity transport solutions will still should be public oriented. They can still be internal combustion engine, but EU6 engines complying with the EU6 emission requirements. We can learn from countries like Brazil that brought in ethanol based additives into the fuel. These additives can come from fruits and vegetables and local manufacture that bring down the pollution through internal combustion engine significantly. You know, we can localize some of these solutions. But what we need is a long-term plan. That long-term plan needs to be built up, and we have placed that plan on the table of the government, and we hope the government would follow our invitation and our gesture and engage the stakeholders in building this plan and then implementing this plan. And I think the same onus goes back to the stakeholders, that governments may come and go, but we should hold them responsible and accountable for delivering the plan that was agreed upon.
Understood. Let's talk about some of the aspects of our public transport. So, we have the buses, then we have the railway, and we've heard the echoes about how these sectors are inefficient, how it's no longer profitable for the government to run it. Even if you take something like railway, we really don't see much of changes apart from a few changes of engines here and there and a few new railway lines being added. I think the focus is on expanding the existing service instead of making the current service more efficient and I would say more convenient, because no one looks forward to a train journey in Sri Lanka, unless of course it's to an area like Alla where it's very scenic, etc. I really don't think anyone enjoys, because if you look at the evening queue, I mean, these are our Sri Lankan citizens, Sheran, who are giving their best, trying to build the economy, and end of the day, when they have to get all, I mean, you can't forget end of the day, start of the day, you're all climbed up, you're hanging not on the train, but you're hanging on to someone who is hanging on to someone who is hanging on to the train. And in a situation like that, you come to work with all that stress, you really can't expect that person to be productive. And even going home is an absolute tin of sardine. Let's be very frank here.
Sure.
What does it need to be done to really change the situation in terms of this travel, especially in the railway sector and maybe even in our public transport like buses?
So, I think we are blessed with having this problem that you talked about.
We are blessed.
We are blessed because it's demanding a solution.
Correct. That means demand is there.
Yes. And why I say we are blessed is the reason for the problem that you described is that our public transport is way behind the region. I mean, even behind countries like India. Now, we have a whole bunch of new toys. It's Hyperloop, it's flying cars.
You're going to come to that in a bit.
Yes, and I'm sorry I'm bringing it out
now.
No,
please.
But we have all this new stuff. And I think what we should do before we jump into putting money into developing existing solutions, the plan that I spoke about in the answer to the previous question should also evaluate the new solutions to the problem and decide which is the best solution for us. Because a lot of these newer solutions are a lot more efficient, and even from a capital expenditure point of view don't cost that much. The government doesn't have to invest the money, there can be private sector investment. You know, we could
Understood.
Explore this in very many ways. So, it's a great question. We all agree that the present level of transport is not good enough, and that is why private ownership has been growing exponentially with incomes growing, and that has caused problems of congestion, of pollution, and of high expenditure in fuel. So, here is the problem that needs to be fixed. We have a bunch of new technologies that can cost effectively fix these problems, and I think that, to me, Tharindu, is the answer to your question.
Sheran, I know you've been very comfortable in that chair all this while, but I'm about to heat it up a little bit with a bit of a controversial topic, the light rail project. You know, the one that is apparently been discarded, but there is a lot of indecision. Some say no, it's being still revalued, some say no, it's been discarded. Either way, if we do not go ahead with a light rail, I mean, I'm not saying about going ahead with it with one particular country, but if we don't develop a light rail project like that for Colombo, I mean, after all, it is the economic capital of the country. If we don't implement a system like that, is it a lost opportunity for the mobility sector of Sri Lanka?
Interesting question, Tharindu. there are valid arguments for the light rail. There are some arguments against it. I think let's try to keep this with givens. What is given is that we need to move away from privately owned mobility solutions doing the last kilometer of travel because of the congestion and the pollution it is causing.
Understood.
Right? And so therefore, one part of the solution is in shared mobility, but the other part of that solution should come from better public transport. Now, the question whether it should be light rail, whether it should be electric buses,
whether it should be an underground
what it
or
should
whatever.
be, I think the government needs to address that problem, decide on a solution and implement that solution, whatever that solution may be. And this is what the report that we gave to the government is inviting them to do. We need a solution to the problem. It's not up to us to say, I mean, we can brainstorm and say my preferred solution is this,
correct,
someone else's
but
is
we
another
need
thing.
some solution.
We need a solution.
Understood.
Now, to me personally, if you want to make my seat hot, personally, if that solution is coming on a highly concessional credit scheme from a friendly country, you know, I think we should positively evaluate that suggestion, that potential solution. But, you know, I'm not the government,
correct,
but the problem needs to be solved.
Understood. Finally, Sheran, let's talk about technology. Now, we spoke about EVs earlier, true, but hyperloops, I mean, what is a hyperloop? And flying cars, I mean, there are some American car brands that have come and said we are actually looking at launching flying cars in China. But with all these technological revolutions and transformations, what does the future of global transport really look like beyond things like ride-sharing platforms, in terms of not just the concept, but how it practically happens? What kind of a future transport world are we looking at? What we saw in movies, flying vehicles, people flying by themselves sometimes, is this really becoming a reality?
I think it is. Let me caricature. We can talk about the products, but let's talk about the ecosystem. What happens when you want to know anything? You go to Google,
yeah,
or you go to a search engine.
Correct.
Do you pay?
No. Not directly.
Yes. I think that's what's going to happen.
I pay with my data.
Exactly. So, we talked about how technology will drive down the cost of transport. Now, we are at the question of who pays. I don't think the commuter will pay. It will cost so little. He will be leveraging his data to people who want to advertise their product to him, and they will pay. Okay. So, we will be in that kind of world of, you know, you will on your cell phone sort of push a button of where you want to go, who you don't want to go with, etc. And your means of mobility will come to you and you will get in and go. Understood. And that could be a ride sharing taxi, it could be a bunch of things.
Correct.
Drones are around. I mean, you know, drones can come and drop off your medicines, it can do a bunch of things that
what we had to travel and come back to, now the drone can really do it.
Yes. And technology will also take a lot of travel from the surface of the earth to a few feet above to ease congestion at ground
what we call
zero.
Personal aviation.
Yes, right. But also, you know, using, you know, products, no, I shouldn't say the name of a product, but there are a bunch of products that does this.
Understood.
So there's drones, there's elevated mobility, and there is underground mobility, you know, and all this technology is quite mature.
Noted. And Sheran, what exactly is a hyperloop, if I may ask?
So it is
it's supposed to be very fast and cuts
yes.
the journey by a couple of hours, etc.
Yes, so it's one of the factors that inhibit ultra fast travel is the forces of air on the vehicle, or
the air resistance basically.
Yeah, it's taking the wind resistance out of the transport, and so it's allowing you to travel much faster.
Understood.
So
you have like a special tunnel
yeah,
through which
travel
you
in
can
a vacuum at ultra high speed.
That's the word, yes. Excellent. Our focus today was on the global mobility sector. What exactly is this industry about? What kind of a future scenario are we truly looking at, and what steps do we need to take in order to improve the mobility and transport sector of Sri Lanka? And joining me for today's very detailed and insightful discussion was an expert in the field of mobility, the former chairman of the Ceylon Motor Traders Association, Mr. Sheran Fernando. Sheran, you are very passionate about this industry, and I know how much you want to see change happening. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your opinion on what we need to do as a country and where this industry is heading worldwide. Really appreciate your presence here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tarindu. Thank you very much for inviting me.
With that, we wrap up today's episode of Bisnomics. This is your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'll see you with the next episode.